Hi, friends around the world. I hope this finds you doing well. During this coronavirus outbreak, as most of us have been sheltering in place, we have probably had more time to think about our relationship with God, and that's a good thing to come out of this. In the previous video titled Sheltering in Place Spiritually, we considered how Noah, in another terrible time that came on the earth, listened to God and built an ark where he and his family survived the flood. The Bible said he did this based on his faith, his confidence and trust in God. Today, let's consider another shelter-in-place story in the Bible and the lessons we can apply to our lives today. The setting was the ancient, powerful empire of Egypt, where the Israelites had become enslaved. God had determined the time was right to deliver them and had chosen Moses to lead them to freedom. But the Egyptians, and Pharaoh in particular, were stubbornly refusing to let them go. God had sent 9 plagues already on Egypt to convince them of his power, but these plagues had only a temporary effect, and any softness on the part of the Egyptians quickly turned back to hardness against God. Moses then warned Pharaoh of the last plague coming, the death of the firstborn of man and beast. Now, one might think that would have convinced Pharaoh, but no, he still refused to listen to God. But what about the Israelites? They too were going to face a test of faith. Moses went back to them and said, "Look, here's what is going to happen, and here's what you need to do." He instructed each family to set aside a lamb and specified the day when they should kill it and put the blood on the doorpost of their houses. Then they were to shelter in place. "None of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning," he commanded. Why? Because, he explained, the Lord is going to pass through the land and strike the Egyptians, but if he sees the blood on your doorpost, he will not allow the destroyer to strike you. Their lives that night literally depended on whether they would believe and follow God. Now, to make a long story short, they obeyed, they were delivered from slavery, and went on to change the course of history. From that time on, the Israelites, according to God's instructions, memorialized this event in an annual observance called the Passover. It was a deeply solemn remembrance of God's mercy and miraculous intervention. But even more than that, it took on broader spiritual symbolism. In the Bible, Egypt is a representation of man's society and way of life as opposed to God's. And Israel's exodus is a symbol of the people of God coming out of sin. Over 1,400 years after the Exodus, Jesus, on the evening before his death, observed as usual the Passover with his disciples. Except that night, he instituted some important changes in understanding what it meant. He washed their feet, symbolizing humility and loving service to our fellow man. Then he took bread and wine, prayed over it, and shared it with the disciples, explaining to them that these symbolized his life being given for us, the bread representing his body being broken, and the wine representing his blood being shed for us. Through his sacrifice, not that of a lamb, we can now have the miraculous deliverance from the slavery of sin. I am shooting this video in the first week of April 2020, as most of the world is sheltering in place to try to avoid getting or spreading the coronavirus. COVID-19, as bad as it is, will not kill most people, but sin will. And all have sinned. And we all need the sacrifice of Jesus Christ to deliver us from that certain eternal death. Interestingly, next week just happens to be the same week back in 31 AD in which Jesus Christ kept his last Passover and was the next day crucified. This would be a great time to read about the events of the Exodus and of Jesus' death, to understand the spiritual parallels for our lives today, and to determine, just like ancient Israel did on that fateful night in Egypt, that we will believe and obey God. We have a lot of articles on our website, lifehopeandtruth.com, to help you with that. Just type Passover in the search bar and you'll be on your way. Until next time, take care and God be with you.